my great pleasure to introduce an old friend of mine, Judge Robert Russell. The world knows him, and you will hear from him as the person who started the first Veterans Court in America, a story that has been televised on national TV. He is a judge who has been visited from all over the country by veterans and judges and people who aspire to start veterans courts, and his story is important to hear, and how he runs his court is important to see. There is, however, in my own mind, a reason why the Veterans Court in Buffalo that he runs works so well, because long before Judge Russell ran that court, he ran a very good court. He is a human being first and a judge second. He understands the foibles of people, and there were people like myself who were trying to see Judge Russell long before he ran a Veterans Court. But what is important is that the Office of Court Administration and everyone else saw in him the kind of person who could start a veterans treatment court. They asked him to do it. He gladly did it in Buffalo. He has since, in 2010, received an award from the Vietnam Veterans of America for the work that he has done. He created in 2002 a mental health court. He created a drug treatment court in 1995. And quite frankly, there are those of us who think specialty courts may at times not be the greatest thing for the system, but with Judge Robert Russell in charge of one, you couldn't ask for anything better, and he's here to talk about veterans courts as they should be run. Judge Russell.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. And you can hear me there? All right, awesome. Thank you. My guy there, I want to, first of all, just say it's give honor to God on this Sunday, and it's truly a blessing to have been extended an invitation to participate in this morning's discussion as we talk about Veterans Treatment Court. I want to give my thanks and regards to Ms. Manning. Thank you so much for the invitation and for all those involved with having this retreat. It's a pleasure to see Jonathan again. It's been a while since I'd seen him, and thank you very much for the work that you're doing for all defenders in the state of New York. And the play was awesome last night. I don't see the gentleman, he was here a moment. I just want to thank him for sharing, and thank Paul, Lieutenant Colonel in the Green Beret, for sharing, because it's important. And part of what we're going to talk about is the warrior mentality, some of the challenges we go through, some of the challenges that we see in the criminal justice system. And part of it, we'll talk a little bit about why we initially began exploring setting up a court for veterans, where no matter what, whether you look to the right or to the left, there is another veteran sitting with another veteran, and the steps that we've taken. But let's explore what's been going on recently since 9/11, when we talk about Iraq and Afghanistan. We know for our post 9/11 that over 2 million veterans have been deployed in the most recent conflict in Iraq and Afghanistan. We realize that we're probably looking at 2.4, 2.5 or so on this global war of terror. In addition, the number of individuals that have had multiple deployments, it kind of differs, does it not, from previous conflicts? Typically, even for those and my brethren who served in Nam, usually it was one tour in your home. This being an all-volunteer military, it's been called upon for many of our men and women who serve to be redeployed. There's been some, when I think about even in the state of New York, Fort Drum, is it? 10th Mountain Division. Some of them, 6, 7 deployments. That's mind-boggling. That's mind-boggling. And yeah, some as high as 8. Also, what differs about this conflict is the number of reservists and National Guard that's been deployed. Typically, when we think about National Guard, we think of what? Those who serve in national disasters, where they're caught up, they're asked to provide support, relief, things of that sort. But in this conflict, probably the most since our Revolutionary War, have we asked citizen warriors, so to speak, National Guard, to actually be in active duty service, deployed to a war zone. The number of reservists. So at periods of time in the conflict in Iraq and Afghanistan, 50% at some periods of time that were deployed were reservists in National Guard. The number of women who have served in this conflict, 15% of the active military being that of females. The number of those that are also parents, their likelihood that they're 2 times more likely to become homeless than non-veteran females. The homelessness, I won't spend much time on it, but the reality of the homelessness with respect to our veterans. The unemployment rate with respect to our veterans. Military sexual trauma. And this was a study that happened in from 2002 to 2008. But we realized, within the last 2 months, there were another study and survey that came out where you're talking about close to 1/3 of the females that have served, that have experienced sexual trauma. And we're not talking about sexual trauma from those that we believe to be the enemy, but for those individuals who's supposed to have your 6. And what does that do where those that are supposed to protect you may be the perpetrators? Veteran suicide and the rate of veteran suicide. This all culminates in the fact that we're seeing more and more of our men and women, and we're likely to see even more coming through our criminal justice system. How did we in Buffalo begin this journey of exploring what more we should be doing with respect to the veteran we're seeing in our justice system? Part of my background, it was indicated in the introduction. I presided over drug treatment courts, still do, mental health treatment courts. Since 1995, I've been presiding over a drug treatment court, 2002, over a mental health treatment court. But in late 2006, while presiding in a mental health treatment court, in a mental health treatment court, we're working with individuals who've been clinically diagnosed to have a severe and persistent mental health disease or disorder. The goal and the function of a treatment court is an alternative to incarceration. Potentially, some of the cases come predisposition before there's a determination of innocence or guilt, with the potentiality of having the charges dismissed. Some, if it does come with a plea or disposition of guilt, there's a commitment of no incarceration, potentially reduction in charges, potentially dismissal of charges. Well, I was working with this one individual. He was about 6'4", Vietnam veteran, and he was linked to one of our community mental health treatment providers. We attempted in the past, and I want to tell you how relationships have changed working with the VA. And I know I have some VA staff folks here. Appreciate y'all. But earlier on, we did not have much of a relationship with the VA. And when you think about not only our community treatment providers, but with the court system, in the state of New York, we have a state office called the Office of Alcohol and Substance Abuse Services, OASIS. And there is a standardized form for release of confidential information. And this standardized form for the release of confidential information is to comply with federal laws. Federal laws are 42 CFR for the release of confidential information with regards to alcohol and substance, with regards to HIPAA, medical records, mental health records, things of that sort. Well, we would use what was approved by the state of New York as the appropriate form for the release of confidential information. And if there was a veteran that was linked to the VA hospital, we would take this form and like, wow, what an awesome form. We're going to now be able to share information. We're going to get information on that person's progress in their treatment program. Because doing a treatment court, what's important is what? How do we monitor and gauge a person's progress in their treatment or recovery unless we have up-to-date information on the person's progress? Well, we would present the form to the VA. It has changed totally now, but this is back then. We would present the form to the VA, and the VA were like, we're like, but this is the state-approved form. We're the federal government. No, we don't honor that form. So for us, part of the challenges was then potentially where the services may be more appropriate to the VA who works with veterans, we would have to have them engage with a local community health care provider because we were then able to receive what? Up-to-date information on the person's progress. Well, this particular veteran, 6'4", he would come into court, his posture would be slumped, his eyes would be directed to the floor, and the report I was receiving back from the treatment provider that we had him working with was that this particular person was not engaged really in the treatment program. He would show up, sometimes his appointments would be sporadic, he was not engaged in group counseling, he was not engaged with the therapist, and he'd been with this local treatment provider for 5 to 6 months. I realized I got a challenge here, and I don't know necessarily how to deal with it. Well, my project director at that time was a guy named Hank Porowski. He since passed away, but I knew he was a Vietnam-era veteran who served in the Marines. There was a guy named Jack O'Connor who was sitting in the courtroom, and Jack had worked for our county government, but he would stop by the court to see how things were going. And I knew Jack was a Vietnam veteran, 82nd Airborne. And I asked both Hank and Jack, would they come forward, and which they did, and would they go out in the hallway and meet with this veteran and see what's going on and if there's anything we could do for this person to help him to get motivated and address his underlying healthcare issues. Well, about 20 minutes later, I see them walk back into the courtroom. I recalled the case, and this particular veteran, who I told you his posture was like this, eyes directed at the floor, not very responsive, this is how he walked into the courtroom. When he walked into the courtroom, recalled the case, he stood before me like this, and his head was raised. To my veterans in the room, thank each of you for your service. But please tell me, what posture was he at? Parade rest. It was at parade rest. And then he looked me directly in my eyes and he said, Judge, I'm going to try harder. It totally blew me away. I'm like, you mean to tell me I've been working with this guy for 5 to 6 months and I'm not getting any response, and a couple of veterans go out in the hallway? They talk with him and he comes back in parade rest? Yeah, that did. So after court, I asked both Jack, my Army vet, 82nd Airborne, who met with this veteran, along with Hank, my Marine veteran, Vietnam, let's sit down and talk. What in the world happened? That was my question to me. What did you say to this guy? He said, well, Judge, not really much. We went out in the hallway, and I was like, where were you at in now? I was here, I was there, I was such and such. And they began comparing where they served, the nature of their service, and then they began to discuss that we care about you and we want you to get better. Can you really work with your treatment provider, healthcare provider? And from that, we then began having a discussion. Is there something more that we should be doing to help our veterans that we're seeing in our justice system? And if so, what should it be and what should it look like? And we know how critical it was, and we heard several speakers talk about how one veteran relating to another veteran can be so critical and so important. What was the next step for us? We began talking, myself, Jack, Hank, what about the possibility if we set aside a day of the week for veterans? It could be a morning, could be an afternoon, could be a day, where we assemble veterans that have clinical diagnosis of a mental health disease or disorder, dependency on substances, where they were in need for health care and health delivery care, if we assembled them together. Do you think that's something we should do, not do? Let's talk about it. Well, Jack, who was very active in the VA community, in the veterans community, he was also active at the VA hospital on their advisory board. He said, I must see if I can get you on the agenda for our next advisory board meeting. Sure enough, I was on the agenda. Now, what is the VA advisory board where I'm located locally in Western New York? It is chaired by the director of the VA hospital, and the other members of the advisory board are all veterans that are active in the veteran community and also have connections and relations to the VA hospital. So you had all of the veteran service organizations represented. The Vietnam Vets of America, the VFW, American Legions, the Disabled Vets of America, and so on. Well, I went to the meeting and I said, thank you for inviting me. This is only a thought. I wanted to get your opinion. We were thinking about setting aside a day where we would assemble veterans who are in need of substance counseling, mental health counseling, things of that sort. Do you think it's a good idea or a bad idea? I got no clue. All of a sudden, the veterans around the table raised their hands. And I was like, oh, goodness. Exactly, believe me. I was like, they asked me a question, I can't really answer it because I got no clue what it would look like. And I said, yes, I see your hands raised. You serious about this? I said, yeah, we want to help. Next veteran, we want to help. I said, what? We want to volunteer. And wasn't one that asked me, well, what are you going to do? How are you going to do it? They just all said, we want to volunteer. We believe it's the right thing to do. And it touched my spirit, and that I said, okay, then let's start meeting. And we started meeting monthly on a veterans treatment court and what it would look like. And these original individuals who raised their hands at the VA advisory board became our initial core of veterans who volunteer. And that concept of having veteran volunteer is unique to our court system. In my drug treatment court, I never really had many people who say, I want to help and volunteer. Now we have an alumni association, so for our alumni association of graduates, we may get some that come and help to volunteer. But typically, I do not have people coming up to me and say, how can I help and volunteer? For my mental health treatment court, I don't have folks saying, hey, can I volunteer? Typically. For the Veterans Treatment Court, it amazed me. Retired teachers, police officers, firefighters, amazing, all branches that would say, we want to help. We are a veteran and we want to help and work with another veteran. And not only from the standpoint of one veteran wanting to help another veteran, but as the journey has gone on for us, we also found that it's therapeutic for our veterans who volunteer. There's also some healing properties with respect to that. But let me go on further. So that's how the journey began. Now, you know how I told you about that relationship with the VA? And that relationship was not unique to us in Western New York. That relationship was similar across the country. There was not much of any relationship or dialogue with the community in the VA, with the court system in the VA, with typically your community treatment providers in the VA. It was the federal government who takes care of their veterans, and it's confidential. We don't get into that. So, having met at the VA, which was chaired by a VA director, having these vets who said they would volunteer, who was part of the advisory board, when we started meeting, it was like, we need a staff person from the VA to be in the courtroom. It does make sense. But what a big time ask. I mean, let's think about it. Right now, we could say these courts have existed over a number of years, that, hey, it's routine. But no, you're asking, and what you're talking about is a state court asking federal government, would you put a federal employee in a state court? Right, that's kind of unheard of. You mean, where the federal government put someone in your state court? And we're like, yes. We made the ask. And you know, thank God for the director of our VA hospital at that time. He said, okay, we're going to have someone from our healthcare side. We're going to allow them to come to court. I said, because we're going to have the veterans assemble. You don't have to find out where they're at. You don't have to go to multiple courtrooms. They're all going to be assembled on one docket in one courtroom, same time, every week. And they agreed to do that. Now, we were operating then in court about a month, and we realized that the VA healthcare employee, when they would speak to a veteran, we want that veteran linked to the VA for healthcare, that sometimes they would have to leave out of the courtroom, get on the telephone to try to schedule an appointment. And they kept going in and out of the courtroom. But we heard that there was a secure computer on a laptop that they could connect to the VA, not only for their locally, but nationally, and be able to access a veteran's records and health care, locally and nationally. Wouldn't that be wonderful? We thought so. So our next ask was, Director, can you allow the healthcare worker to come to court with a secure federal laptop that will be connected to your VA healthcare record and sit in the courtroom?
Yeah, right. I'll think about it.
But I tell you, God has truly blessed us because it wasn't dismissed. They actually And we knew that approval had to come from Washington. And the Deputy Undersecretary for the VA granted approval. Never done. Granted approval for the VA healthcare worker not only be in the courtroom, but also that bring their secure computer directly linked to the VA healthcare. Isn't that a blessing? Yeah. And what that then allows is when a case is called involving a veteran, that person is able to sit right there, get on the computer, see if they've been linked to the VA. If they haven't been linked, start the process, be able to schedule an appointment for that person, be able to indicate when they were last there, if they're on medication, work to make sure those things are done. And so I'm so grateful, and that changed a number of relationships. Also, you know how I told you about the release for confidential information? We still had to get past that hurdle, didn't we? We worked with and met with the general counsel for the VA nationally. After the court started up, we worked and got local approval on what releases they would have. But the National Council, and now it's William Gunn, we were able to work out with the legal in-house counsel for the VA and the regional lawyers for the VA and come up with a standardized form uniformly that can be used nationally for all courts to be able to receive information on a veteran participation in the VA healthcare, to provide and receive services at the VA, and for the court to receive that information so we can better help and respond to the needs of the veteran. Yes, sir.
I want to make sure I understand this right. So when this standardized form went national, if other states decide to have veteran courts, this system is already in place for them?
Yes, sir.
Outstanding.
Yes, sir. Oh, no. Well, thank you for asking that question, because it's important that while we discuss, any questions you have, please do stop me and ask, because I want clarity for us all, so we can do what we can if we don't have a Veterans Treatment Court in our jurisdiction to look at the possibilities for us. This individual here, he was Deputy Undersecretary William Fielding. Had a chance to meet him. We did a conference on trauma 2 months after we started the Veterans Treatment Court. And he was the one that gave approval for the computer to be in the courtroom. But in addition, a year later, he created, in his position and power at that time, the position that is now known as a Veteran Justice Outreach Worker, a VJO. That previously, that position did not exist, but once they placed a worker in the Buffalo Veterans Treatment Court to be able to assist and engage veterans, this position was created at all 144 VA hospital facilities, not only in the continental U.S., but also in its territories, where that person's responsibility as a VJO is to engage veterans in the justice system, not only in the courts, in the jails, and also in the prisons. And they're now allowed to 6 months prior to a veteran's discharge from prison to be able to work on discharge planning and services. That did not exist in years prior. Before, the VA couldn't go into or they wouldn't, or they couldn't, whatever, into the prisons and into the jails. But this position created that opportunity where they can work on engaging veterans, so once they are discharged from jail or prison, to be able to have a smooth transition for VA healthcare related services. What is a Veterans Treatment Court? It's a specialized court where you have on a particular docket veterans assembled that are in need of substance dependency, mental health services to be addressed. Now, I say the majority. In a number of cases, you have nonviolent felony or misdemeanor, but violent offenses are accepted case by case. And when I say violent offenses, case by case, you examine and look at the facts, the circumstances. Is there underlying mental health diagnosis, underlying dependency on substances? What was occurring with the veteran at the nature and the time of the particular offense, prosecution, defense, talk, and see if it's appropriate for Veterans Treatment Court. I would like to also say this. We had one particular veteran, which I'm also grateful for, and I think God had a big hand in all of this, not only in the creation of this court, but you know how I said how major it was for a federal government to put a federal employee in a state court? What would you think if the federal government charged a veteran with solely federal crimes and send them to a state court, and if they complete the state court program, they would dismiss the federal charges? You would say that would be unheard of, wouldn't you? It happened. We received several cases from our U.S. Attorney's Office in conjunction with agreement with our federal public defender, with our federal probation, with everyone in the court, and said this veteran who was looking at 10 years in federal prison, if he completes the local, no state charges, just strictly federal, if he completes the local state Veterans Treatment Court, we would dismiss the federal charges. And it was on some of the charges include, it was a violent offense, in addition to other threats and so forth made against the federal properties. And one of our graduates is a graduate that was strictly charged with federal offenses. But let me tell you what was neat, because you see I'm going back and forth as we're talking and things come to mind. This particular individual, we had a day of what we call recognition when you complete the Veterans Treatment Court, and it's part of the recognition. Not only do we congratulate them, I leave the bench, come down on the floor, we're on the same level, shake their hand, present a certificate. Our volunteer veterans present a coin, and the coin is unique to military culture and things of that sort. Present a coin to them, and the coin states on it, Buffalo Veterans Treatment Court. On the back it has all of the emblems for the branches of service, the American flag, POW flag, so forth, and gives a statement to that person and puts it in the coin in the veteran's hand. Well, on this day, we're going to do this recognition for this federal veteran who was solely charged with federal offenses. I noticed who comes in the courtroom was the federal magistrate, along with the assistant U.S. attorney who was prosecuting the case, the assistant federal public defender, the federal probation officer. And I'm like, whoa, they're all in the courtroom, right? And this is a local state court. I'm like, wow, look at them here. So we go ahead, we go with the recognition. I'm like, well, the federal judge is here. I said, would you like to say something? The federal judge actually stood up, congratulated the veteran on the work that he'd done, and he said, for the record, your charges are hereby dismissed. And you ought to heard all my veterans sitting in the courtroom. They were all, hoorah, hoorah! The courtroom totally erupted. But it just let me know that the possibilities does exist if we don't just limit ourselves or our mind or our thinking to saying, well, it can happen and it won't be done. So when Jonathan talks about a number of needs of reform, and that's extremely important. But I'm also encouraged, I guess, by this, that how we as a society are examining how we treat our veterans. And as we think about Memorial Day and for those who made that ultimate sacrifice and gave their lives for our freedom, the freedom we realize in this country, I think it's also extremely important for us to realize that there are many that have returned home with the invisible wounds of war. And it's important that we, and there's been a number, whether it's from George Washington to Abraham Lincoln, to talk about that we as a country will be defined by how we what? How we treat our veterans. Very much so. And it's important that we stand up for our veterans. A lot of reform that has happened is actually from the work of our Vietnam veterans. Our Vietnam veterans and the reception they received when they came home was not a welcome one. And they also have a policy of what? Never again. Never again will we have our veterans return home and receive the treatment that they received from our Vietnam veterans. And I think that's why we still see remnants of Vietnam veterans in our criminal justice system. But they were the ones who advocated for a number of changes in the laws and benefits. So our Iraqi and Afghanistan veterans, they're receiving a lot of benefits based on the advocacy of our Vietnam veterans. Matter of fact, even when Paul had talked about going to the vet center, the vet center was a creation from the Vietnam War and the advocacy of the Vietnam veterans. Yeah. All right, target population. These are some of the discussions that's going on around the country. When you talk about Veterans Treatment Court, communities are debating. Do we take combat, non-combat? Who do we take into our programs? Violent offenders. Do we take them? Do we not? But there's greater advocacy to say, don't dismiss violent offenders from your treatment court, for Veterans Treatment Court. They are trained to be warriors. They're trained to be violent. How do you expect immediately on the return home that somehow, you flip a switch. So they must be considered. The discussions of, do you take active duty soldiers in the Veterans Treatment Court? What issues does that present? Reservists, National Guard, high risk, high need, and so forth. What we want to do, of course, is to successfully rehabilitate our veterans, reduce the behavior that brought them into the program, and also we want to work on what? We want to work, if you're unemployed, to get you a job. If you're homeless, to find homes for you, adequate, safe housing, employment skills, job skills, and yes, sir.
I just wanted to make a point about that last thing.
Yes, sir.
I don't know how it is now, but back in my day, if you were involved in the civil court while you were on active duty, when they got done with you, you went back and you were charged with military charges for being AWOL or whatever it took while you were being processed.
Double indemnity.
Yes. Well, let me say this. That's why I think with a number of Veterans Treatment Court, and I know it's important for us to work to build up a relationship with the commanders. Because the commanders of a base have some broad discretions, do they not? And if you build up a relationship, part of it is a discussion on, let us work with the person rather than putting them up on article charges where they potentially be dismissed, discharged from the service. It may or may not, but some of the Veterans Treatment Courts are located by military bases. And it's important that they have a dialogue and communications with the military base. Us locally, there was one veteran who was up on Article 15 charges for drug use, drug dependency, and was going to be potentially discharged from the reserve unit. And this person wanted to make that part of his career. Well, we worked with the commander, and the commander said, all right, we'll let him work with you. We'll suspend Article 15. The person's successful, we'll keep him. And they did. And that person was. But it takes doing things that we customarily may not have done in the past to be able to say, what can we do to provide the best support? All right. Early identification. That's a big challenge, not only locally but nationally. How do we identify veterans coming through our justice system? Typically, and prior to this movement, the question was not usually asked, have you served in the military, National Guard, or the reserves? Matter of fact, we learned through the process not to ask someone if you're a veteran, because a number of people don't know how to interpret that. They may have served, but say, no, I'm not a veteran. Because some think, well, in order to be a veteran, I must have served in a foreign country. Or in order to be a veteran, I must have been in war. Or in order to be a veteran, I must be going to the VA. So rather than that, we just ask, have you served in the military, National Guard, and Reserve? And then we'll do the workup as to what we can do and be able to help or to provide. The other thing is we began to ask our local jail, our police, on their pedigree information. When they ask a person, what's your name, what's your address, to include, which they now do, at our local jail, a standard question, have you served in the military, National Guard, or Reserve? And we then get a notification of any vet that is being detained, so we can send staff person and the VA representative, VJO, can meet with that person to begin to see what services we can provide and what assistance we can provide. So early identification is important. What's unique about the court is it's a court entirely of veterans. Have the VA healthcare workers, including not only from the VA hospital, but representatives from the vet center right there in the court. The ancillary services are there for housing, things of that sort. Veteran mentors. And I'm going to speak a little bit more about veteran mentors and how key they are. Working to create a therapeutic environment. And what do I mean by therapeutic environment? Where I thank a person for their service on their first day that they come to court. Now, that may seem a little unique, where you're charged with criminal offenses, and typically the first time I might see that person, they may or may not be in custody, but a lot of times they're in custody. I'll give you one quick example. I had one particular veteran, he's in custody. He's brought into the courtroom. My typical dialogue is this, tell me your name, where do you live, so forth, so forth. Have you served in the military? I already know that beforehand, but just to have it verified. Yes, what branch of service, what was your MOS, where were you stationed, things of that sort. And then it's like, well, thank you very much for your service. And I then have them turn around and I introduce them to the other veteran participants and indicate this is that person. This is such and such first day in Veterans Treatment Court. Show them a nice welcome, would you? And typically all the other veterans will stand and applaud. Well, this one particular gentleman is in court. I go through this dialogue, thank him for his service, introduce him. He's in handcuffs. They all stand up and applaud for him. He looks at the guard and said, am I in the right court? right, in the courtroom, you have the VA healthcare workers. You have, in addition, and this is important for my veterans, after we started the court for about 4 months, 5 months, and we had tried to get, now the VA is divided up into 3 branches. Is that right for my VA staff folks here? They're divided into the healthcare, to the benefits office, and the cemetery. Those are the 3 branches, 3 units for our VA. Now the healthcare, they agreed to have a staff person there. But the benefits, they handle the VA benefits with respects to disabilities, the benefits for schooling, the benefits also with regards to potential upgrades of their discharge status. You want to say something? Eligibility, which is extremely important. They get the DD-214s, and if there's issues or discrepancy, they can provide a tremendous benefit and values for our veterans. And a number of our veterans, they are entitled to monetary compensation based on the disabilities related to the service that they earn. Well, about 4 or 5 months after we started the court, initially, they weren't buying into being in the courtroom. Then the director came and said, you know what? We want to be in the courtroom with you. And now we have 2 representatives from the Benefit Affairs Office that is in the courtroom processing and helping to facilitate the veterans' benefits. Is that major or what? Yes, sir.
Do you track, Your Honor, do you track the benefit activity that those individuals acquire for the veteran?
I don't personally myself, but my veteran mentors do. But at the same time, being in court, it has a way of helping the process move along with respect to benefit claims. And my veteran mentors, a number of our veteran mentors are also veteran service officers who are trained to be able to present a claim on behalf of veterans. They're trained on how to do the paperwork. A number of times a veteran's claims are dismissed because of how the paperwork is done. To have someone that is trained to be able to articulate and put it down in the proper format, so at least it increases the probability of success for their claims, that is handled by a number of our veteran mentors who are also veteran service officers. Also, if there appeared that there may be something in that person's record between you and I, oh yeah, that's all right. You may, on occasion, have them, maybe someone's a twitch in the eye, where the mentor may know this is something I need to work on the veteran with. Okay? And I'll probably leave that alone. That's bad. But what's part of the challenge? It's that warrior mentality, isn't it? We know that. We've heard from a number of our warriors that how do we motivate someone to address the underlying health care? Because someone's going to think it as natural, won't they? I know I've been self-medicating. I know I'm having trouble sleeping. But that's natural. Served in war. There's nothing wrong. I'm okay. A big part is how do we incorporate and work with our veterans? We have a number of little over 40 veterans who have volunteered in our local Veterans Treatment Court. We rotate them. When I say is, we just ask for 1 day out of the month, and they're in units of 4. They come in, they keep a logbook. Part of their goal and their role is to help that veteran address their underlying issue. But their motto, and this is the motto that they created, and prior to this movie, or no, where the movie came out in 2002, but they took the motto of the Vietnam veterans of America, which is to leave no one behind. And the big issue for us is, even when a veteran returns home, some mentally still may be back in country. How do we work not to leave them behind? And that's a significant role, an extremely important one, of our veteran mentors. They're coach, facilitator, advisor, sponsor, and they provide support. I like this T-shirt my one veteran was wearing in court. The only thing worse than losing is quitting. And how do we create that attitude and that mindset? Some of you might ask, well, what are some of the things we're seeing in our court? And I'm going to have to move through this quickly so at least we can have some question and answer period. Our largest percentage that we're seeing are from the Army. And then Marines and Navy, have sizable chunks. But part of that is because typically it's going to be what? The boots on the ground. All right, God bless. Over half are from our most recent conflict that we're seeing locally. From Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom, over half. Then we got a sizable chunk from Persian Gulf, but still our Vietnam veterans. They're still in the justice system with us. Over 60% of our cases are felony-related cases, but we also take misdemeanors. But this is interesting. 73% of the veterans we see locally in the Veterans Treatment Court, unemployed when they came through at the time of their arrest. What did that tell us, and what do we need to do to address it? For my veterans, is it anything that surprises you that the primary drug of choice is alcohol?
Legal.
But is it part of the mixture of the culture? Yes. And let me tell you one other quick story. I was invited to speak at one of our local reserve units. They have been deployed about 5 times. And this was their annual military ball. And the commander sent out an invitation and sent some of the representative and the commission officers to invite me to be their keynote speaker. I'm like, wow, what a privilege at their military ball, be the keynote speaker. And some of the NCOs was telling me prior to coming, we want you to talk about Veterans Treatment Court, but we know some of our veterans are having challenges in being back home, PTSD, things of that sort. And we don't think they're really addressing it. So would you come and speak? I said, sure. You're going to have a treatment judge, come there and speak at your military ball. So at the military ball, they're in the finest uniform. Look awesome, beautiful, sharp. The ladies are in their fine wear, the gentlemen in their fine Class A's. Look awesome. Then, prior to me speaking, they bring out this large punch bowl. And then they say, it is time for grog. So those who served in the military, raise your hand if you know what grog is. Then all of a sudden, they started calling up, Sergeant, come on up. And Sergeant comes up with a big bottle, a fifth of some alcohol. Called the name, Wild Turkey, whatever, and it pours it. Then they calling different members, each coming up with a bottle, each pouring it into the same bowl. Then he said, we need a dirty sock. One guy takes off his shoe, takes out the sock, put it in a bowl, and then stirs it. And said, come on and get your grog. And I'm thinking, here I am, a treatment judge. at their military ball, and they serving grog, mixed with all sorts of concoction. All right, that's a little backdrop on Plan B, but it went well. Yes. Oh, yeah, you can't read. Yeah. And this is also type of diagnosis of veteran. We were seeing close to almost 69% have mental health diagnosis. And this is just solely dependency on substances. It was 31%. The largest category of mental health, 42% was for post-traumatic stress disorder. Next was major depression, anxiety, some bipolar, schizophrenia. What age group does the manifestation of schizophrenia shows up?
Late 20s, early 30s.
Young male.
Yeah, young male. And a lot of times our men and women, particularly our young ones, they sign up and serve at what age? Yeah. So for some, schizophrenia. This is a drawing done by one of my veteran graduates, Vietnam veteran, never had a prior arrest, charged with a violent offense. But notice his drawing. A bottle of vodka. And this is what he told me. He said, Judge, when I came home from Nam, I drank a bottle of vodka a day. He worked for 30 some odd years. He was functional in the sense of going to work. But then this event happened 2 years after his retirement. This is a picture of him and his wife, their marriage. You see the crucifix here. And he said, Judge, this particular day, since Nam, I did not pick up a weapon. On this particular day, we had a rifle that was like an heirloom passed down, one of those old historic rifles that was passed down from generation. It was in the closet. He said, this day I went to the closet and I picked it up. And when he picked it up, what happened? Yeah. He thought he was back in undiagnosed post-traumatic stress disorder that he self-medicated all those years and was never treated. Charged with, as you could see, with the firearms, some serious, felony offenses. Fortunately, the law enforcement, when they arrived, entered the home. They used de-escalation skills in which no one was physically injured. Fortunately, the prosecution and defense, they worked it out where this person was able to come to Veterans Treatment Court. And he is a graduate of our program. And I'm grateful that he was able to come through the court and the program rather than being stuck with felonies and maybe some other dire consequence. Right now, this was a map that was done several years ago, but right now, the VA has indicated that they're working with 167 courts across the country that have set up and geared either as a veterans treatment court or a tract of their other treatment courts in order to help assist and work with veterans. And thank you for inviting me. And if there's any questions, I guess I have about 7 minutes. Yes, ma'am.
During this weekend together, we've heard about a lot of alternative treatments, working with horses.
Oh, yes.
Ed Tick's program, Soldiers with Heart. Is there any, and others, I don't want to neglect anybody, but is there any way that your court can refer people to other treatments besides the VA?
Oh, without a doubt. And thank you for asking that question. Our court follows the national statistic also. 80% of the veterans we're working with are veterans who qualify for VA healthcare benefits. There's 20% who do not. the 20% who do not, either because of a question on their service, either because of their discharge status, have to be serviced by one of our local community health care providers. In addition, a number of our vets will receive additional services from community providers. If a veteran has a long-standing relationship, let's say with a psychologist, psychiatrist from the community, good relationship that they build up, we're not going to somehow do anything but support that. Some veterans might receive alcohol and substance services at a community health care provider, mental health provider, community mental health provider, but receive their physical health care at the VA. So there's combinations, and yes, we do utilize that. With regards to the utilization of the horse therapy, if you talk, that one veteran who drew that drawing, he went through that at the VA. They had, I forget the nature of what they called the therapy, alkaline therapy or something. Yes. And I remember I was so excited to hear that he was in that program. So I'm excited, and I was more excited than him, but you can imagine. I'm excited. I said, wow, tell me, what is it like working with the horses? He said, Judge, I'm brushing a horse. I said, what? I'm brushing a horse. But part of it, and you probably can explain it, part of it was him, they take steps of him taking care of the horse and building that relationship. But it was interesting because as he's beginning that therapy, I knew about it, I was excited about it, but it took him a moment to get acclimated to what that program was about. Education is extremely important. It's important that we continue to educate the judges, the defense bar, the prosecution. I'll give you one example when we talk about case by case. There was one particular case that defense counsel approached us about whether we would accept this particular veteran. And this particular veteran had stabbed another veteran multiple times. Serious physical injury. And based initially, it was like, no. But here's what happened. Defense counsel made sure the work was done. Had the veteran go to the vet center and to have medical evidence helped tremendously. And that evidence was that at the time, this was a traffic accident. You have one individual, they didn't know each other. They're pulled up to a toll booth. The veteran who was charged with the serious violent assault, attempted murder he was charged with, hit the back of the other vehicle. The one veteran gets out, looks at the license plate, and the license plate of the veteran who's charged has Purple Heart on his license plate. So he figured, oh, it's another vet. I'll come on over, we'll talk. That other vet stabbed him multiple times.
He what?
Stabbed him multiple times. Well, the vet center began working with this veteran, and the report came out that this veteran not only suffered from PTSD, but has no recollection of the event at all. You know, he's very mournful for the event, but he just totally blacked out. That was enough then that the court where the case was pending, rather than send this veteran to imprisonment, they worked out a resolution where they sent it to Veterans Treatment Court. And so we're working with that veteran, and that veteran is doing exceptional now. But it was such a tragic event. There's another event where you talk about, this happened in a veteran was the law enforcement get a call of a person with a gun. They respond to this call, and when they respond to the call, there's discharge of the firearm. The law enforcement are there, the veteran is in the woods, discharge of the firearm. Subsequently, the veteran is charged with attempted murder, homicide. He steps out of the woods, still holding the gun, and goes like this. Suicide by cop. Now, he's charged with very serious violent offenses, discharge of the firearm. But in the jurisdiction, as a matter of fact, this particular case was on the front page of the New York Times about 2 years ago. This case was sent to a veterans treatment court, and this event happened, I believe, in the state of Illinois, or it was Michigan, Illinois. And that person, rather than having been prosecuted for these serious felonies, his case is in being held through the Veterans Treatment Court in the state of Illinois. There's another case which was highlighted by the Lear report on PBS, big case, and this was in the state of Colorado. And in this particular case, this veteran was charged with some serious felony offenses. Felony offenses was breaking and entering, burglary, and things of that sort. But here was the facts of the case. As articulated in this program, the veteran is seen kicking in doors in his neighborhood, walking in, looking around, walking out, going to the next house, kicking in the door, walking in, looking around, looking at the perimeter, and walking out. Help me, veterans, what was he doing? Looking for the enemy, clearing houses. And of course, in that community, you got some serious, what in the world is going on? He's charged with serious felony offenses. Fortunately, based on the medical reports and the things that they got, they were able to, and they did place that person in the Veterans Treatment Court in their jurisdiction. And they had interviewed this person on the Jim Lear report, talking about he had totally blanked out. He had no recall. Only recall he had is what they told him, and it wasn't his recall, it was what other people's recall. They said you did this, did that. I got no clue. And that person was and I'm pretty sure when they interviewed him, he had completed the Veterans Treatment Court in that jurisdiction. So those are some of the things. It's still a work in progress, as you talk about, but more and more is education, sensitizing those in leadership position in the prosecution, defense bar, judges, so forth, on how can we best handle certain cases. All right? Thank you.